Hello everyone. For a second, let's talk about aeronautical decision making. Everybody likes to claim that they are really good at being smart pilots and making good aeronautical decisions. However, normally, at least for me, if you're flying VFR, it's typically not an issue. It's either VFR weather or it's not. The plane is either in good condition and passed the run-up test or it's not, etc. However, I just want to talk about my flight last night. I was planning to take off from Stanley County, go to Richmond County. We were going to do some maneuvers along the way. I had a buddy with me. Everything was going fine. We took off from Stanley. The run-up was fine. We work on some power off stalls, power on stalls, and steep turns. We then go to Richmond County Airport just to land. I've never been to that airport before. We do a full stop landing with a taxi back, and then we get ready to take off from Richmond County, potentially go over to Monroe, then back to Stanley. So we take off from Richmond County. As we're climbing out, I see the weather ahead of me is starting to get almost sunset. In fact, it was actually after sunset, but it was starting to get dark and the weather was not looking great. So I told my buddy, hey, we're not going to go to Monroe. We're just going to go straight back to Stanley. As we get 1,000 feet above the ground, I start to pull my power back and pull the prop back to 2450 RPM. That is per the pilot operating handbook for my airplane. As I do that, I notice that the prop is not pulling back and the RPMs are not dropping. It was starting to get dark, so I turned on my instrument panel lights so that everything could become illuminated. And that is when I noticed that the oil temperature gauge was pegged to the max and the oil pressure gauge was lower than what it should be. This got my attention pretty quick. I mean, obviously I checked all the gauges on the ground roll before we rotated and came off the runway, and everything was fine. But on the climb out, when I noticed I did not have the prop pulling back, I looked at the gauges and they weren't looking correct. By this point, we're only a couple miles from the runway, and as bad as I wanted to get back home before the weather came in, again, had to make a decision, and I chose to go back to Richmond County. On our very short approach back to Richmond County, I told my buddy, hey, we'll talk about it when we get on the ground, but we need to land here and I need to check a few things. So we very safely got on the ground. I kept the prop full forward anyway since we were coming in to land, and I checked the oil quantity, and it was very hard to distinguish what the dipstick was showing because, again, everything was super hot by this point. The plane had been warmed up. But I was like, you know what? It doesn't hurt to add a few quarts of oil. My plane can hold up to 12. It generally likes to run between 9 and 10 quarts of oil, but it can hold up to 12. So I added 2 quarts of oil, gave it a few minutes just to kind of settle down into the engine, rechecked the dipstick, and it was looking much better at that point. It was about 11.5. So by then, again, the weather was fine, but it was dark at this point. So we got ready, we took back off. Of course, doing a run up again before we took off. So I'm watching the radar the whole time back. From Richmond County Airport to Stanley County Airport to get back home is only about a 35 minute flight in my airplane with those current wind conditions. But there was a cell of rain and low visibility that had just barely clipped the Stanley County Airport. And I had told my buddy, it does not look like VFR conditions. However, the ASOS was still reporting VFR and the current METAR was reporting VFR, but the radar image just didn't look great. So I told him, hey, we're gonna proceed back, but understand that if we get close and we cannot make it in, we will turn around and go somewhere else. Now, keep in mind, by this time, it's probably 9 o'clock at night. I'm ready to get back. I'm kind of tired. We hadn't flown that long, but I had just been awake all day and I was ready to get home. We get closer back, the tower's closed, so I'm making radio calls on the CTAF frequency, and I make my 10-mile call, get closer. Everything still seems to be fine. I click the push to talk 7 times and I don't see runway lights. And in fact, I can't even see the rotating beacon. This was the first red flag. We get closer and closer and nothing's in sight. We're 5 miles out, nothing's in sight. I do have good visibility where I'm at. I can see the ground. Everything seems fine. There's no precipitation, nothing really crazy. But again, we're 5 miles out and I can't see the airport. I can't see the runway. And that airport has very, very bright and very good runway lighting and I can't see it. So we make the decision to do a 180 basically and head back the direction we came from because I knew the weather was good that way because we had just flown from that way. As I start my 180-degree standard rate turn back to the south, it starts pouring on my plane in the sky. Just for 20 seconds as I'm getting through the turn, and then it stops. So we go back to and land at Anson County Airport. And in fact, when I had first checked the weather, it was winds calm, everything was good, everything looked beautiful. I always check the winds again as I turn my downwind leg just to see if they've changed since I'm getting close to landing. When I checked the winds again, they were gusting 12 knots. Not crazy, but that is a big change from winds calm. No big deal. We make it down safe and sound to Anson County Airport, and I told him, hey, we're going to just ride it out, wait, and keep checking the weather at Stanley. When it looks good, we'll go back. While we're killing time, let's just go ahead and get some fuel because that airport has some pretty cheap fuel prices. So we fill up the airplane. As we get done fueling up, it immediately starts dumping just tons of rain on us. So we go inside the FBO, start to ride it out. The weather just kept getting worse. Now, from the Anson County Airport to the Stanley County Airport in my airplane is like 11 or 12 minute flight. It's really not that far, but it needs to be 11 or 12 minutes of safe and good weather. So we landed around 9:20 something, I think, or 9:30 something. We did not take back off out of Anson until after midnight. And let me tell you, that sucks. I'm trying to get home. I don't want to be stuck in this boring FBO all night, but I want to be safe about this. And I was watching the radar. I was watching ForeFlight Weather, awc.gov. I was checking just regular like WeatherBug and AccuWeather and everything, every weather source that I could think of. Of course, they all show something a little bit different, but they were all very similar. It started to get to the point where the radar didn't look great, but I would call the ASOS number at Stanley. I would check the ASOS at Wadesboro. I would do a weather brief in ForeFlight between the two airports. And even though the radar did not look great, the weather was reporting fine. Clear below 12,000, light rain. So I was like, you know what? We're going to do this. And I got to trust trust our resources, trust what the weather's telling me. So, but the flip side is you want to feel good about it. And flying in just rain, I feel fine with. That's no big deal. The winds were relatively calm. The clouds were reporting just fine. I mean, they were clear below 12,000. And so I felt good with it, even though it is at night. Again, that's something you have to make as the pilot, and I felt fine with it. But let me say, there is no shame in not feeling fine with it. Number one, you always feel a certain way with a single engine airplane at night, whether it's VFR or IFR, because if something happens, well, it's hard to determine where you're going to land. So we go to take off, and it is truly just light rain. But when you're flying at night in light rain, it feels a little weird. So on the climb out in my airplane, if I pitch for VY, which is my best rate of climb, I cannot see the horizon. The nose is, where I sit in the plane, I can't see out. So I do temporarily rely on instruments, and I just watch my airspeed, and I try to peg the best airspeed on the airspeed indicator. So I couldn't see anything. All I could see is rain flying past me. I could still see the ground, but it got my heart rate up a lot. And it's not because I thought anything was unsafe. It's just that was a new experience for me that I have not felt before at night in the rain, even with good visibility. Naturally, the rain kind of cuts back on that a little bit. Anyways, we got up pretty quick. Again, it's a short flight. As soon as we leveled off, I could already see the Stanley County Airport clear in a million. I mean, there was no haze, no nothing. It was absolutely beautiful. There was some very low level clouds. And when I say very low, I mean like probably overcast at 300 feet maybe. But it was probably 5 or 10 miles laterally away from the airport. So I knew that we could just fly over top of those clouds, keep our distance above the clouds for our airspace requirements, meet those legal criteria. And we were able to come in and land, completely normal landing, no rain. It was absolutely beautiful. So I guess the whole reason I make this video is to just say that do not be scared to divert. And I know everybody says that. Everybody in training, when you're doing pilot, everybody talks about in aviation, it's okay to go around. It's okay to, just land the plane and divert and ride out a storm. It's okay to do these things. And you hear that all the time, but until you've actually had to make that decision, to me, it didn't hit home. It's easy to make those decisions when everything's sunny and beautiful. Of course, you're like, well, yeah, it's sunny and beautiful. If it gets bad, I just won't fly. Again, it's easy to say that, but until you do it, things change. And I had to do it for the first time last night. So do not be scared to do that. As much as that sucked, having to sit there for 2.5 hours, just boredom, wondering if we're ever going to get out of here or if we're going to have to spend the night or get an Uber ride home or whatever. As much as that sucked, it's like the quote I read one time that you'd much rather be on the ground wishing you were in the sky than be in the sky wishing you were on the ground. Let's be honest. Takeoffs are optional, but landings are mandatory. Anyways, sorry for blabbering on. Just wanted to share that story with you and just, I guess, kind of encourage you to do not be afraid, even if you have pressure from, buddies, those external pressures from buddies or family or trying to get home and go to bed or whatever. Just be smart, make a good decision, fly safe.